A single drop of liquid starlight trembles on the tip of a paintbrush. This is the moment for Elara, a young artist who can paint dreams into reality. She stands at the edge of the Whispering Woods, a forest that sleeps under a blanket of ancient magic. Her task is to capture its perfect silence on canvas before the Grand Dreamweavers Festival begins. Success will prove her worth as a true artist, but failure carries a terrible price. If she cannot paint this dream, the wood's magic will fade, and she will be exiled from her home forever. By the end of her story, you will understand how color and light can weave a sanctuary for the soul. I wonder where you are listening from right now, and what the local time is for you. What do you think it truly means to paint not what you see, but what you feel? The deep indigo mark on the canvas felt like a shout in a sacred library. Instantly, the shadows around Elara thickened, drinking the gentle light from the mosses until the clearing felt cold and unfamiliar. Her ambition had been too loud, her brushstroke too heavy for the fragile dream she was meant to honor. A knot of fear tightened in her chest. This was not a simple landscape she was copying. The forest was a participant, a silent collaborator, reacting to every choice she made. To force her will upon it would be to destroy the very silence she needed to paint. She set the large brush aside, her hand trembling only slightly as she selected a finer one, its bristles soft as a whisper. Dipping it into a wash of diluted silver, she approached the canvas not as a conqueror, but as a guest. This time, her touch was a mere suggestion, a gentle blending at the edge of the harsh indigo, an apology written in light. And as if accepting her change of heart, a soft, melodic chime drifted from between the ancient trees, a single note of light asking to be seen. The single note of light led her deeper into the gloom, a silver thread pulling her through the tangled roots. There, nestled in a bed of velvet moss, grew a cluster of flowers unlike any she had ever seen. Their petals were not mere white, but seemed woven from captured moonlight, and they pulsed with a soft, internal radiance. With each gentle pulse came a harmonic chime, a melody so quiet it felt like the forest breathing. These were the singing lilies, their very existence a testament to the delicate balance she sought to paint. Her need for their light was immediate, a visceral pull, but so was the understanding that to grasp too greedily would shatter the song forever. Her hand hovered over the most vibrant bloom. To pluck a living petal would be a violation, an act of taking rather than receiving. Her eyes scanned the mossy floor, and there it was, a single petal that had completed its cycle, lying like a discarded sliver of pearl. With painstaking care, she lifted it. It was cool and surprisingly heavy in her palm, thrumming with a faint, melodic energy. On her stone palette, she gently ground the petal with a drop of dew. It dissolved not into a mere pigment, but into a liquid luminescence that hummed softly, a tiny pool of captured song. As if acknowledging her respectful choice, the lilies responded. Their collective glow intensified, washing the clearing in a serene, silver light that pushed back the oppressive shadows. The gift was generous, but it came with a profound weight. She could not waste this trust. Her painting would now have to be a tribute worthy of their song. In this new, clearer light, a subtle path of faintly glowing stones became visible, winding away from the clearing and into the profound darkness where the oldest trees stood guard. The faintly glowing stones formed a path that felt less like a guide and more like a test. With her canvas secured on her back, Elara stepped forward, the hum of the lily paint in her pouch, the only light in the suffocating dark. The air grew thick and heavy, a physical pressure that made each breath a small victory. Ancient roots, slick with damp moss, seemed to coil and twitch at the edge of her vision, snagging her ankles as if the forest itself was trying to hold her back. A cold dread began to pool in her stomach, a whisper that she was a fool to believe she could translate such ancient, complex magic into mere pigment and brushstroke. What if her hands were too clumsy, her vision too small for the grandeur of this sleeping world? The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a judgment. Instead of pushing forward blindly, she forced herself to stop. She sank to the damp earth, ignoring the chill that seeped through her clothes, and pulled out a stick of charcoal. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hand was steady. She would not fight these shadows or pretend they did not exist. She began to sketch them, not as monstrous threats, but as powerful, living shapes. She captured the way they twisted around the gnarled bark, how they pooled in deep hollows, giving form and depth to the towering trees. As her charcoal scraped across the page, a quiet realization unfolded within her. True silence was not emptiness. It was not the absence of all things. It was this very tension, the profound dialogue between light and dark, presence and absence. The forest's dream needed its shadows to be complete. Her task was not to paint a void, but a harmony. The moment this understanding settled in her mind, the oppressive atmosphere shifted. The grasping roots stilled, becoming merely roots again. A faint, cool breeze sighed through the branches, carrying the scent of wet stone and carrying her forward toward a sliver of less dense darkness ahead. The sliver of darkness ahead widened into a breathtaking opening in the ancient wood. Elara stepped from the oppressive gloom into a sanctuary of pure moonlight. The air itself seemed to shimmer, charged with a silent, silver energy. High above, the canopy parted in a perfect circle, allowing the full moon's radiance to pour down, painting the forest floor in a constantly shifting tapestry of silver and deep, velvety blue. Ferns dipped under the weight of glistening dew, each droplet a tiny, perfect lens, capturing the celestial light. It was a scene of such profound and effortless beauty that it stole her breath. For a long moment, she could only stand there, humbled. Then, a cold dread washed over her. She looked from the impossible perfection of the glade to the paints on her stone palette. Her precious pigments, the ground lily light, the carefully mixed hues, all of it suddenly seemed crude and lifeless. How could any color from a pouch hope to capture the living breath of moonlight? Her hands felt clumsy, her entire purpose a foolish vanity. The magic here was complete in itself. It did not need her interpretation. It mocked her ambition. Despair threatened to paralyze her completely, but then she remembered the lesson of the shadows. She was not here to compete with the forest, or to simply copy it. Her role was to listen, to translate. She looked again, not at the moon itself, but at what the moonlight was doing. She studied the way it caressed the spine of a fern, turning it from green to silver. She watched how it pooled in the cup of a leaf, creating a miniature, liquid mirror. She saw how it defined the edge of a shadow, giving it shape and meaning. Her task was not to paint the light source, but to paint the light's conversation with the world. This was the breakthrough, a shift in perspective that felt both terrifying and right. The success of the entire painting now hinged on this delicate approach, on her ability to suggest rather than state, to capture an effect rather than an object. It required a touch more subtle than any she had ever attempted. Her focus narrowed to a single, plump dewdrop hanging from the tip of a nearby fern. It was a perfect sphere of captured moonlight, a tiny world in itself. She mixed a wash of the faintest silver, her brush poised to suggest its fragile, reflective surface. But as she leaned in, something within the dewdrop moved. It was not just her own reflection she saw there, distorted and small. Deep within that miniature lens, she saw another pair of eyes looking back at her, curious and unblinking. Those eyes within the dewdrop did not blink. They were ancient, patient, and held a light that was neither moon nor star. Slowly, Elara straightened, her own breath held tight in her chest. From behind the fern, a creature emerged. It was small, no larger than a fox. Its body a living tapestry of woven vines and shimmering moss that shifted with every silent step. Moonlight seemed to cling to it, outlining a form that was both solid and dreamlike. This was a Sylvan Guardian, a spirit of the woods made manifest. It moved with an unnerving grace, circling her easel with a quiet intensity that made the air hum. Its nose, a tiny, twitching knot of dark wood, sniffed at her stone palette, then at the jar holding the liquid song of the lilies. Each sniff felt like a judgment, a silent question probing the very core of her ambition. Was she an artist here to listen, or just another intruder trying to take? Elara forced her body into absolute stillness, though her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Any sudden movement could be misinterpreted as a threat. This was the forest's final test, not of her skill, but of her intent. Her gaze fell upon the brush she had poised to paint the dewdrop, its tip still holding a faint shimmer of the harmless lily paint. With a slowness that felt like an eternity, she extended her hand, offering the brush not as a tool, but as a gift. It was a gesture of peace, an offering of the only pure magic she had been given permission to use. The Guardian stopped its circling. It tilted its head, those deep, knowing eyes fixed on the softly glowing bristles. For a long, suspended moment, the entire glade seemed to hold its breath. Then it stepped forward and gently nudged the brush with its nose. A wave of warm, earthy energy passed through the wooden handle and into Elara's hand, a sensation of acceptance that was both startling and profound. The creature turned, its tail of trailing moss giving a single, deliberate flick. It did not look back, but the message was clear. The path was not behind her, or even ahead on the ground. It was wherever this guardian chose to lead. The Sylvan Guardian led her through the moon-washed glade to the base of the most ancient tree she had ever seen. Its bark was not rough, but smooth like polished stone, and etched across its vast surface were patterns that were not random. They swirled in elegant lines and delicate dots, a natural sheet music written by time and the elements. The air around this colossal tree did not feel empty. It pulsed with a deep, resonant rhythm, a vibration so powerful it hummed up through the soles of her feet and into her bones. This was not an absence of sound. It was the source of all sound, the forest's steady, sleeping heartbeat. Elara's quest to paint silence had been based on a misunderstanding. True silence was not a void. It was this profound, living pulse. Her greatest challenge now stared back at her from the musical bark. How do you paint a sound that is felt rather than heard? How do you make a viewer sense a vibration through nothing but color and form? The answer would not come from copying what she saw, but from translating what she felt. She looked at her canvas, then back at the tree, and made a decision. She would use composition itself to suggest the invisible energy. Dipping her widest brush into a wash of the deepest indigo, she began to paint not the tree, but the space around it. She started with a dark ring at the trunk's base, then mixed progressively lighter shades of blue and silver, painting them in concentric circles that radiated outward across the canvas. Each circle was a slightly different hue, a subtle gradient meant to mimic the way a pebble dropped in a pond sends out ripples of energy. It was an audacious gamble. If the color shifts were too harsh, it would look like a target. If they were too subtle, the effect would be lost entirely. The success of the entire painting, its very soul, hinged on this delicate suggestion. As she worked, focusing all her intent on capturing the rhythmic pulse, something remarkable began to happen. The vibrations in the air seemed to intensify, resonating with her brushstrokes. The Sylvan Guardian, which had been watching from a respectful distance, settled onto its haunches. Then it began to hum. The sound was low and earthy, a fundamental note that wove itself seamlessly into the rhythm of the tree. It was not a song with a melody, but a harmonic anchor, a thread of pure magic that drifted across the clearing and seemed to sink directly into the wet paint on her canvas. The pigments themselves began to shimmer with an internal light, the concentric circles now glowing with a soft, pulsating energy. Elara was no longer painting alone. She had become a conductor, and the forest itself was the orchestra. A fine, shimmering dust drifted from the Guardian's fur of moss, settling like starlight onto her stone palette. Elara did not hesitate. She scooped the glowing pollen into her small pots of pigment, stirring it into the lily light silver and the deep indigo. The moment the substances merged, her breath caught. The colors transformed before her eyes. The blue deepened into a hue she had no name for, a shade that held the tranquility of a midnight sky just before dawn, a dream blue. The silver warmed into a gentle, honeyed radiance, a whisper gold that seemed to speak of hidden sunbeams, and from the mixture of shadow and light emerged a soft, luminous purple, a silence violet that vibrated with a profound and peaceful stillness. These were not mere paints. They were liquid emotions, captured essences of the wood's own dream. She loaded her brush with the dream blue and touched it to the canvas. Instead of staying where she placed it, the color bled outward in a slow, deliberate wave, seeking its own shape. A whisper gold stroke beside it did not create a hard edge, but curled and intertwined with the blue, forming a delicate, leafy pattern that she had never consciously designed. A thrill of panic shot through her. This was not painting. This was a negotiation. Every instinct she had honed through years of precise, controlled work screamed for her to dominate the medium, to force the pigments to obey her vision. But her vision, she now understood, was too small. To command this magic would be to break it. Closing her eyes for a brief moment, she made a choice. She let go, Her next brushstroke was not a declaration, but an invitation. She laid down a wash of silence violet, and then simply guided the flow with the lightest touch, allowing the paint to pool and feather into shapes that resembled the soft shadows under distant ferns. It was an act of profound trust, a partnership between her intention and the paint's own innate wisdom. The struggle was visceral, a battle between the artist's ego and the forest's soul, but with each surrender, the painting grew more alive. The stakes were terrifyingly high. Her success was no longer solely in her hands. It depended on this beautiful, unpredictable alliance, a dance with a power she could admire, but never truly control. As the final harmonious blend settled, a soft light began to emanate from the canvas itself, no longer merely reflecting the moon's glow, but generating its own gentle radiance. The light fell upon the face of the Sylvan Guardian, illuminating its features. The creature's ancient, watchful eyes, which had held only judgment, now held a deep and unmistakable approval. It gave a slow, deliberate blink, a silent blessing that washed over Elara with a warmth more comforting than any sunlight. The Sylvan Guardian's approval was a warmth that faded as quickly as it had come. The creature turned its head, its gaze sharpening. With a deliberate, slow motion, it reached out a single, root-like toe and pressed it gently against the lower corner of the wet canvas. The contact was brief, but the effect was instantaneous. The canvas, which had been glowing with its own serene light, suddenly rippled like the surface of a pond. Fleeting images bloomed and dissolved within the pigments, a silent, rushing torrent of the forest's own memory. Elara saw centuries pass in a heartbeat. A great tree falling in a storm, its impact a silent shudder. A fox family curled in a den, their breath misting in the cold. The slow, patient dance of constellations across the night sky, witnessed only by the leaves. Her painting was no longer just a scene. It was becoming a living chronicle, a tapestry woven from every moment the woods had ever known. A wave of overwhelming responsibility crashed over her. She was not merely an artist now, she was an editor of history. The memories flowed into the paint of their own accord, a chaotic stream of joy, struggle, birth, and decay. But she sensed that her guidance, her intent, could shape which memories took root in the final image and which faded back into the ether. The weight of the choice was immense. To include a memory of a harsh winter might honor the forest's resilience, but it would shatter the peaceful dream she was meant to create. A memory of a predator's hunt would speak of nature's balance, but it would introduce a note of fear into the sacred silence. Her heart hammered as she watched a vivid image of two stags locking antlers flash angrily across the canvas. This was a story of conflict, of raw power. It was true, but it was not the truth she was here to paint for the sleeping world. She made her decision. As the next memory surfaced, a fragile fawn, taking its first wobbly steps on newborn legs, its mother, watching closely, Elara, focused all her will upon it. She did not paint with her brush, but with her mind, her spirit. She poured her own feeling of tender awe into the image, encouraging it to settle, to deepen its colors and find a permanent home within the layers of pigment. The violent clash of the stags flickered and dissolved like smoke. Another memory arose, a single seed splitting open in the soft embrace of moonlit soil, a tiny green shoot reaching for the sky. She embraced this one too, guiding it into the composition, letting it symbolize quiet, persistent growth. She curated the forest's soul, selecting only the moments of pure connection, of gentle cycles, of peaceful existence. Each chosen memory added a layer of profound, untold depth to the painting, transforming it from a beautiful picture into a sanctuary of feeling. As the last of these serene memories, a vision of morning dew collecting on a spider's web, each droplet a perfect world, sank into the canvas and solidified, the air in the glade changed. The resonant hum of the ancient tree faltered. A cold, sharp wind, utterly foreign to the still night, sliced through the clearing. It carried the dry scent of dead leaves and distant stone, a chill that had no place in this living dream. The Sylvan Guardian, which had been sitting in tranquil observation, flinched. Its form, a moment ago so composed, now bristled. Every strand of moss on its back stood on end, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, a sound of pure warning that cut through the sacred silence like a knife. The gray mist did not drift. It seeped, a slow and sickly stain, bleeding into the edge of the moonlit glade. Where it touched, the vibrant silver light dimmed as if smothered by a grimy cloth. The melodic hum of the ancient tree faltered, the sound swallowed into an unnerving quiet that was not peaceful, but dead. This was the creeping dullness, a force that fed on magic and joy, leaving only a hollow, colorless silence in its wake. Elara watched in horror as the leading tendril of mist reached her stone palette. The luminous paints, her dream blue and whisper gold, instantly dimmed, their inner light snuffed out like a candle. A cold panic, sharper than any she had felt before, shot through her. This was no longer a test of her skill or her intent. It was an attack. She saw the mist curling toward her canvas, toward the fragile, living chronicle she had poured her soul into. Without a second thought, she moved. She planted herself squarely between the advancing grayness and her painting, her arms spread wide. It was a futile, human gesture, like trying to stop the tide with her hands. But as the cold mist brushed against her, she felt a deeper instinct take over. She raised her brush, still wet with the vibrant silence violet, and swept it through the air in a wide, defiant arc. She was not painting on the canvas now. She was painting on the world itself. The pigment did not fall. It hung in the air, a shimmering, translucent curtain of violet light that hissed where it met the encroaching gray. The dullness recoiled for a moment, repelled by the pure emotion woven into the color. A spark of understanding ignited within her. Her art was not just a representation. It was a weapon of preservation. She began to paint faster, her brush strokes creating a shimmering barrier of color and light. Each stroke was a memory she defended, a prayer for the forest's dream. The Sylvan Guardian let out a sharp, defiant bark that cracked through the dead air. In response, the very leaves on the surrounding trees shivered and sharpened, turning their edges toward the threat like 1,000 tiny, ready blades. Her brush was a blur, dipping into the last precious pool of dream blue. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a spray of the potent color toward the mist's leading edge. It was not a weapon thrown in anger, but a shield raised in desperation. The droplets hung in the air for a heartbeat before splashing against the gray advance. A violent sizzle filled the unnatural quiet, and the air filled with the sharp scent of ozone and extinguished magic. Where the paint struck, the creeping dullness recoiled, repelled by the pure emotion woven into the pigment. A small patch of the forest floor was revealed, the moss looking dazed but alive. It was a victory, but a devastatingly costly one. The dream blue evaporated into wisps of steam, its power spent. Each droplet was a piece of the sanctuary she was trying to build, a fragment of the dream she was sacrificing just to hold the line. Elara was an artist, not a warrior. Her strength lay in patience and subtlety, not in frantic, desperate combat. Panic clawed at her mind as she watched her irreplaceable resources vanish with every defensive flick of her brush. The whisper gold followed, a swift, arcing stroke that carved a temporary boundary in the air, forcing the mist back another step. But the gray menace was vast, and her paints were finite. To fight it head-on was to lose. She would exhaust her entire palette and have nothing left for the painting itself, ensuring her failure just as surely as if the mist had consumed her. A new strategy, born of pure instinct, took hold. She would not try to destroy the dullness. She would contain it. Shifting her stance, she began to paint with swift, economical strokes, no longer aiming directly at the mist, but around it. She used the last of her silence violet to draw a shimmering, translucent line on the ground, a circle intended to trap the grayness within its circumference. It was a gamble of immense risk. She was using the very essence of the forest's peaceful dream to cage its nightmare. Every drop of paint that left her brush was a color that would never find its way onto the canvas, a note of harmony forever silenced. She was actively dismantling her own masterpiece, piece by precious piece, hoping that saving the heart of the woods would leave enough magic to complete her task. The circular barrier snapped into place with a soft chime, a wall of vibrating color that held the advancing gray tide at bay. For a long, trembling moment, it held. The mist pressed against the colorful boundary, unable to cross, but it did not retreat. Instead, it began to writhe and coalesce, the formless gray drawing in on itself, condensing into a thick, swirling pillar that pulsed with a sinister energy. It was no longer a mindless fog. It was a menacing, shapeless figure that now tested the strength of her colorful wall with deliberate, focused pressure. The barrier of color flickered, its light dimming under the relentless pressure of the condensed gray pillar. Elara watched in horror as a hairline crack appeared in her violet wall, a spiderweb of failing magic. She had nothing left to mend it with. Her pots of pigment were empty, her brushes dry. The creeping dullness sensed its moment of victory, but before it could breach the defenses, a flash of green and gold shot past her. The Sylvan Guardian did not hesitate. It leaped directly into the heart of the swirling gray mass. For a single, blinding instant, its body became a sun. A wave of pure, living energy erupted from it, a concussive blast of emerald light and golden warmth that seared through the mist. The unnatural grayness did not just retreat. It screamed, a silent, psychic shriek of dissolution as it was utterly purged from the glade. The oppressive weight lifted, and the forest's resonant hum returned, weak but steady. The cost was immediate and devastating. Where the Guardian had stood, only a small, still form remained. Its vibrant coat of moss was now a dull, brittle brown, the light in its ancient eyes completely extinguished. A sob caught in Elara's throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run to its side, to offer some comfort, to mourn. But as the last remnants of the gray mist vanished, the air itself began to sparkle. Floating motes of pure magic, released from the Guardian's final act, drifted around her like luminous dust. They were the last echoes of its spirit, a final, generous gift of power. She was torn in two. Her heart ached with a grief so sharp, it was a physical pain. Yet her artist's mind saw the terrible, fleeting opportunity. This magic was already fading, dissipating back into the forest. If she did not capture it now, the Guardian's sacrifice would be for nothing. The fate of the Whispering Woods, its very dream, hinged on her next, impossible choice. With tears streaming down her face, she made the decision. Her heart breaking, she raised her brush. The tears fell onto her stone palette, mingling with the dried remnants of pigment, creating small, sad puddles of color. But as she focused her will, the floating motes of magic responded, flowing toward her brush like iron filings to a magnet. The wooden handle grew warm in her hand, humming with a power that was both exhilarating and sorrowful. She did not look back at the fallen Guardian. She turned instead to the canvas, which now seemed to pulse with an urgent, waiting light, as if it too understood that this was the final, defining moment. The Guardian's final gift flowed through her brush like liquid sunlight. Every stroke was no longer an act of creation, but of channeling. She wove threads of liquid pearl through the dark canopy of her painting, each one a captured moonbeam that pulsed with the Sylvan spirit's life force. The raw power surging into her hands was immense, a torrent of magic that threatened to shatter her fine brushes and crack the canvas with its intensity. Her greatest challenge became restraint, to balance this overwhelming energy with the delicate precision needed for the finishing touches. A heavy, clumsy stroke could turn the serene moonlight into a harsh, glaring sun, destroying the dreamlike quality she had fought so hard to build. She took a slow, steadying breath, letting the magic settle within her before guiding it outward with the lightest possible touch. Her focus narrowed to the most crucial detail, the eyes of the creatures she had painted. With a brush as fine as a spider's leg, she touched the eye of a deer hidden among the ferns. She did not paint a pupil, but a single, minuscule point of reflected light, a spark of consciousness that made the animal seem not just alive, but aware and perfectly at peace. She moved to a bird on a branch, then to a fox peering from its den, giving each one that same quiet spark. This was the final, essential ingredient. It made the forest in the painting feel not like a frozen image, but a world awake and dreaming, a sanctuary where every soul was content. The entire canvas began to radiate a warm, gentle light, pushing back the real night's lingering darkness and filling the glade with its own luminescence. The painting was on the very edge of becoming real, a true dream made manifest. As she added the last highlight, a single dot of pearl on a dewdrop, she set her brush down. A profound and comfortable silence fell, deeper and more complete than any she had ever known. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of absolute harmony. A profound and comfortable silence bloomed from the canvas, a wave so pure it was almost audible. It rolled out across the glade, a gentle force that settled over the whispering woods like the softest blanket. The trees seemed to sigh in unison, their leaves stilling as a deep, dreamless sleep claimed the forest. The magic that had felt so fragile and threatened was now not just stabilized, but amplified, humming with a contented strength that resonated from Elara's painting. The immediate danger had passed, but the effort of that final channeling had hollowed her out. A deep exhaustion settled into her bones, and a quiet, unsettling thought took root. Had the painting, in sustaining the woods, taken something essential from her in return? She felt strangely muted, as if the vibrant colors of her own emotions had been poured into the canvas, leaving her own spirit a faded sketch. She did not stand as a triumphant artist. Instead, she sank to the mossy ground, sitting before her work not as its creator, but as its first and most weary viewer. She allowed the scene's serene power to wash over her, the depiction of perfect peace, slowly seeping into the empty spaces the struggle had carved within her. The painting's light was a gentle, constant radiance, and as she watched, the silence violet and dream blue seemed to swirl with a life of their own, holding the forest in a protective embrace whose full consequences were still a mystery. Then, in the corner of her vision, a flicker of green light danced. She turned her head slowly, her heart leaping into her throat. There, where the Sylvan Guardian had fallen, its faded form was stirring. Threads of emerald light, shimmering with the exact same energy as the paints on her canvas, were weaving through its brittle moss, slowly, tenderly knitting its body back together. A soft, moss-covered nose nudged her open palm. The Sylvan Guardian was whole again, its eyes glowing with the same dream blue that now lived within the painting. Its restoration was a miracle woven from the artwork's own magic, a gift returned. In a gesture of profound tenderness, the creature then turned its head toward the canvas and breathed out a single, soft sigh. Its breath, warm and smelling of damp earth and blooming night flowers, misted across the painted surface. Where it touched, the pigments shimmered, and a delicate, intricate pattern appeared in the lower corner, a permanent, luminous signature of intertwined roots and leaves. It was the forest's own seal of approval, a bond forged in shared struggle, now made visible. A fierce surge of pride warmed Elara's chest, but it was immediately tempered by a deep, humbling truth. She looked from the Guardian's mark to the entire scene she had labored over. This was not her masterpiece alone. It was a chorus. Her hand had held the brush, but the lilies had given their light, the shadows had taught their lesson, and a brave spirit had given its essence. To claim this work as solely hers would be the greatest arrogance, a betrayal of the very collaboration that had made it possible. The painting needed a name that honored its true origin. She would not call it Elara's dream or the artist's triumph. Dipping a fine brush into a last drop of whisper gold, she inscribed the title with careful, reverent strokes at the base of the canvas, the Heartwood's lullaby. It was a tribute to the ancient, sleeping pulse at the forest's core, the true composer of this silent song. In that moment of selfless naming, something within her settled into place forever. The connection she felt to the whispering woods was no longer that of a visitor or a temporary custodian. It was the bond of a guardian, an artist whose purpose was now inextricably linked to protecting and interpreting this sacred magic. As if in response to this internal shift, the first true rays of dawn pierced the canopy. The painting, which had glowed with its own powerful moonlight, sensed the changing sky. Its radiance softened gracefully, its cool silvers warming to match the gentle gold of the morning sun, as if the dream within it was now breathing in harmony with the waking world. The canvas was warm against her back, a gentle heat like a living thing sleeping within its protective wrapping. As the morning sun fully claimed the sky, the whispering woods felt utterly transformed. The path that had been a treacherous test of shadows and fear the night before was now a sun-dappled avenue, clear and welcoming. Branches seemed to part for her, and roots shifted subtly under the moss to make her steps sure and easy. It was a silent, grateful escort home, yet with every friendly rustle of leaves, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She thought of the grand dream weavers, masters of grand illusions and spectacular, vibrant dreams that danced with color and motion. Her painting held a different kind of magic. It was not a shout of joy, but a whispered secret, a lullaby woven from silence and shadow. Would they see its depth, or would they look upon its subtle hues and quiet composition, and see only a failure of ambition, a timid and unfinished thing? She decided then that she would not defend it with elaborate words or boastful claims. To explain its power would be to diminish it, to try and contain the forest's own voice within the clumsy cage of language. The painting would have to speak for itself, her future as an artist, and more importantly, the delicate new balance of the woods, now rested entirely on a panel of wood and pigment. The familiar, pearlescent gates of the starlit enclave shimmered into view between the trees. Elara paused, her hand resting on the warm canvas roll. She took one deep, steadying breath, filling her lungs with the clean morning air, and stepped forward to meet her judgment. The grand hall of the Dream Weavers fell into a deeper silence than Elara had ever known. It was a heavy, judgmental quiet, thick with centuries of scrutiny. As she unrolled the canvas and secured it upon the viewing stand, a subtle wave of energy pulsed from the painting. It was the cultivated silence of the whispering woods, and it washed over the assembled masters like a gentle tide. All murmurs ceased, the rustle of silk robes stilled. Even the restless tapping of fingers on carved armrests came to an abrupt halt. Every heart in the room seemed to slow its pace, soothed by an unseen hand. The Council of Master Artists, figures renowned for crafting dreams of spectacular color and epic scope, simply stared. Their faces were unreadable masks of age and experience, offering no clue to their thoughts. The silence stretched, becoming an agonizing void that threatened to swallow Elara whole. She did not fidget or try to fill the emptiness with explanations. She stood quietly beside her work, her hands clasped before her. Her confidence was a small, quiet flame, but it was rooted in something unshakable. It was fed by the memory of the Sylvan Guardian's sacrifice and the profound trust the forest had placed in her. This was the final test. Rejection here would not just mean personal exile. It would mean that the delicate magic she had helped stabilize, the very dream of the Whispering Woods, might be deemed unworthy and allowed to fade. The stakes were the future of a world. Then, the eldest Dreamweaver rose from her central throne. She was a woman whose eyes held the light of ancient galaxies, and she moved with a gravity that commanded the very air. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the painting. She did not reach out to touch the surface, which still hummed with a faint, warm light. Instead, she held her palm an inch from the canvas, her long fingers spread wide, as if to feel the heartbeat of the art itself. The single tear that traced its path down the elder Dreamweaver's cheek was more eloquent than any spoken accolade. It was a testament to a truth felt, not just seen. When her ancient eyes opened again, they shimmered with a light that seemed to reflect the very dream blue of the painting. She turned slowly to face the assembled masters, her voice, though soft, carrying the weight of final judgment. She did not speak of technique or color theory. She declared that Elara had not merely painted a scene, but had woven a sanctuary for the soul, achieving a level of artistry thought lost to legend, a magic that spoke to the essence of being rather than the spectacle of it. A ripple of shock, then a murmur of unrest, moved through the grand hall, while many older masters nodded in solemn agreement, their own faces touched by the painting's profound calm. A different emotion flickered in the eyes of some younger artists. It was the sharp, cold glint of envy. They saw not the sacrifice or the collaboration, only the unprecedented honor bestowed upon someone their own age. In that moment, Elara's victory became complicated. Her success secured her place among them, but it also marked her as irrevocably different, setting her on a new path where admiration would always be shadowed by scrutiny and heightened expectation. Elara's response was instinctive and pure. She did not smile in triumph or glance at those who watched her with resentment. Instead, she bowed deeply to the elder, her gaze lowered. It was a gesture that acknowledged the profound wisdom behind the praise, not the glory of the praise itself. She was honoring the forest's lesson, the understanding that true art is an act of service. The elder Dreamweaver observed this humility, and a faint, approving smile touched her lips. She stepped forward and placed a hand on Elara's shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm and firm. Without a word, she gently guided the young artist away from the murmuring assembly and toward a secluded archway that led to a private chamber, indicating that a conversation of great importance was about to begin. The quiet of the private chamber was a different kind of silence, filled not with judgment, but with the weight of unspoken truths. The elder Dreamweaver's gaze held Elara's, her ancient eyes reflecting a deep concern. The harmony she had painted, the elder explained, was a rare and precious victory, but it was only a single note in a symphony that was slowly falling silent. Other ancient places, realms of magic as old as the stars themselves, were fading, their dreams growing faint under the same creeping dullness that had threatened the whispering woods. Elara's gift, that profound ability to listen and translate a place's essence, was not just a talent, it had become a vital necessity. She was offered a solemn commission, a formal role as a lore-keeper artist. It was a title of immense honor, but it came with a stark reality. Her life would no longer be within the safety and community of the Enclave. It would be a journey of solitude, traveling to the forgotten corners of the world to paint the souls of dying realms before they were lost forever. The path was one of immense responsibility, a life set apart. For a long moment, Elara looked inward, weighing the comfort of home against the call of a purpose far greater than herself. But the choice, when it came, felt less like a decision and more like a recognition. This was not a burden being placed upon her. It was the natural, inevitable extension of the partnership she had forged with the forest. To refuse would be to deny the very truth she had learned in the moonlit glade. Her quiet acceptance shifted the axis of her world. Her art was no longer a personal quest for mastery. It was now a thread in the fabric of magic itself, and her future actions would determine the survival of entire ecosystems. The elder nodded, a gesture of profound respect, and placed a single, enormous leaf into Elara's hands. It was a map, its surface etched with living veins that shimmered with a faint, golden light, charting a course to her first destination, the high, wind-swept plateaus of the Sky Singers. The pigments did not arrive ready-made. For days, Elara worked under the open sky, her small stone mortar and pestle her only companions. The deep crimson came from a rare iron-rich stone she ground to a fine powder on a wind-scoured peak, its color holding the memory of volcanic fire. A delicate, shimmering azure was painstakingly distilled from the light of the evening star, caught in a dew catcher at the perfect moment of twilight. Each color was a promise, a potential key for a lock she had not yet seen, intended for landscapes she could only vaguely imagine from the living map. Her new palette was not a single harmonious set like the dream blues and whisper golds of the forest. It was a vast and wild spectrum, a toolbox of contrasting energies that reflected the unpredictable world she was about to enter. Holding a jar of brilliant, sun-scorched yellow next to a vial of deep, abyssal black, she felt a tremor of doubt. The success in the Whispering Woods had been born from a deep, intuitive connection. Would she be able to listen so carefully to a desert's scorching breath or a glacier's frozen heart? The fear whispered that her triumph had been a fortunate accident, a fluke of circumstance that could not be repeated. To quiet this anxiety, she made a deliberate choice. She carefully unrolled the original painting, the Heartwood's Lullaby. Its serene light filled her small workspace, and the profound silence it held seemed to settle her own restless spirit. She would not travel with it for display or glory. She would carry it as her compass, a tangible reminder of the first and most important lesson, that true art begins not with a statement, but with listening. The tools were prepared, their potential immense and terrifying. On the final evening, with her pack full of strange colors and her canvas secured in a protective tube, she felt the weight of every unknown mile ahead. The true test would not be in the mixing of paints, but in the moment she would have to use them to converse with a dying, unfamiliar world. She walked to the familiar edge of the Whispering Woods, not as a hopeful novice, but as a sworn guardian, seeking a final blessing before a long journey. The familiar path to the edge of the woods felt like a final farewell with every step, and there, just where the dappled sunlight gave way to the open fields, a figure of woven vines and shimmering moss stood waiting. The Sylvan Guardian did not approach with ceremony. It simply looked at her, its ancient eyes holding a deep, unspoken understanding of the journey ahead. Then, with a gentle, deliberate motion, it lowered its head, a single root-like whisker, glowing with a soft, internal green light, detached from its cheek and drifted into Elara's open palm. It was warm, humming with the same vital energy that pulsed through the ancient trees. The message was clear. This was not a tool, but a tether. Her hands trembled only slightly as she carefully bound the glowing bristle to her finest brush with a strand of her own hair. The moment the connection was secure, a wave of warmth flowed up the wooden handle and into her hand. It was a sensation of roots sinking into deep, rich soil, a grounding presence that promised she would never truly paint alone. The gift was immeasurably generous, but its weight was immense. This was a piece of the forest's own soul entrusted to her care. To use it carelessly, to fail in her mission, would be a betrayal not just of a duty, but of a friend. The goodbye was a quiet ache in her chest. She knelt, bringing herself eye level with the Guardian, and made a promise not in grand words, but in a soft whisper that was carried away on the breeze. She vowed to honor its trust, to let this connection guide her hand, and to one day return not with boasts of glory, but with canvases full of the stories she had saved, painted in the very light and silence of the worlds she would visit. The Guardian blinked slowly, a gesture of absolute faith, then turned and melted back into the shadows of the trees without a sound. She was now truly alone, the familiar comfort of the whispering woods, a solid presence at her back. But her path lay forward, into the unknown. She tightened her grip on the brush, feeling the living hum of the bristle against her skin, a constant, quiet reminder of the bond she carried. Taking a deep breath that smelled of pine and distant rain, she turned away from the sanctuary of her first great collaboration and fixed her eyes on the distant, cloud-shrouded peaks. The first step toward the mountains felt like stepping off the edge of a map, guided only by a pulse of green light and a promise. The winding path crunched softly under her boots, each step a deliberate echo in the new silence. With the familiar scent of the enclave fading behind her, Elara felt the weight of her pack, not as a burden, but as an anchor to her purpose. The world ahead was a vast, unrolled canvas of ochre earth and sharp, distant peaks, a landscape that demanded a new kind of seeing. The solitude was immediate, a physical presence that pressed in on all sides, testing the quiet confidence she had carried from the woods. It was a stark contrast to the communal hum of the Dreamweaver's halls, and for a fleeting moment, the sheer scale of her task threatened to overwhelm her. But she did not turn for a last glance at home. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the way. The first rays of sun caught a ribbon of silver far below, a river already weaving itself into the composition of her next unknown masterpiece. Her hand drifted to the brush at her belt, her fingers brushing the living bristle, and a calm settled over her. This was the true beginning, a life dedicated not to personal glory, but to the sacred act of listening to fading worlds. A rising wind whispered across the plateau, carrying with it a faint, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate up from the stone itself, a siren song calling her toward the heights. The rising wind was not merely a force against her skin, it was a voice. Elara stopped on the steepening path, her body still as she truly listened for the first time. The sound was not a simple howl or a random rush of air. It was a complex, layered hum, a melody woven from countless notes that swirled around the high plateau like an invisible river. This was the ancient song the map had hinted at, the first true whisper of the Sky Singer's magic. It was a language of pressure and flow, a story told in vibrations that resonated deep in her bones. The sheer complexity was dizzying, a symphony without a single clear instrument or a defined beginning. How could she possibly paint a song? Her first instinct was to look up, to try and capture the vast, empty sky from which the music seemed to originate. But the sky was a blue void, offering no form, no anchor for her brush. Her gaze dropped instead to the land itself, to the way the wind was not just heard, but seen. The long, golden grasses of the plateau did not simply bend. They danced. They flowed in great, rhythmic waves, their movements a direct, physical translation of the song's tempo and intensity. A sudden, powerful gust would send a dark ripple speeding across the slope, while a softer, sustained note made the stems shiver in place. It was a visual rhythm, a choreography written by the air. With careful hands, she slid her pack from her shoulders and knelt on the stony ground. She pulled out a small, leather-bound sketchbook and a stick of charcoal. She would not start with paint, not yet. Her task was to learn the alphabet of this place. Her hand began to move, not drawing objects, but tracing the paths of the wind. She made swift, flowing lines that followed the direction of the grass, darkening the charcoal where the wind pressed hardest, using lighter, sketchier strokes for the gentle eddies. She was not sketching a landscape. She was transcribing a melody onto paper, mapping the invisible forces that shape the world. The beauty of it was intoxicating, but also profoundly disorienting. There was no single focal point. The entire plateau was alive with motion, every inch participating in the song. To try and capture it all would be to create a chaotic, blurry mess, a visual noise that would convey none of the music's power. She needed a center, a single point of stillness from which to understand the storm. She closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her, and focused on the feeling of the sun-warmed stone beneath her knees. This solid, unchanging earth was her anchor. Opening her eyes again, her perspective had shifted. She saw not the overwhelming whole, but the intimate conversation between the wind and a single, resilient clump of grass clinging to a crack in the rock. She watched how each individual blade responded to the pressure, how they supported each other, bending but never breaking. This, she realized, was the key. Her first painting of this new realm would not be a grand portrait of the sky. It would be a portrait of the wind itself, as witnessed through its gentle, persistent sculpting of the land. It was a risky, innovative approach. If she succeeded, it would establish her as a true visionary, an artist who could paint the unseen forces that bind the world. But if she failed, the painting would be dismissed as an abstract curiosity, a confusing and unsuccessful piece that failed to capture the majesty of the high plateaus. The stakes for her new role as lore keeper artist were immediate and real. With a newfound sense of purpose, she filled several pages with studies of the grass, of dust devils, of the way pebbles trembled in the wind's path. The initial disorientation faded, replaced by the focused calm of a translator finding her footing. She closed the sketchbook, its pages now holding the first draft of a song. Shouldering her pack once more, she continued her climb. The wind's song seemed to grow clearer with every step, as if the mountain itself was now aware of the listener ascending its slopes. The stone crumbled under her boot, sending a small cascade of pebbles skittering into the abyss below. The path was no longer a trail, but a sheer climb, forcing Elara to press her body against the cold rock face. Every muscle screamed in protest, a raw ache that was utterly foreign after the soft, forgiving earth of the whispering woods. Her lungs burned with the thin, sharp air of the high altitude, each breath a conscious effort. One hand, scratched and raw, sought out secure holds in the granite, while the other remained curled protectively around the strap of her pack, ensuring the precious tubes of pigment and the canvas roll did not scrape against the stone. This was not a gentle walk through a dreaming forest. This was a trial of sheer physical will. The struggle was its own kind of language, a harsh dialect spoken by the mountain. To understand this place, she had to listen with her entire body, to feel the strain in her legs as a testament to the plateau's imposing height. When she found a narrow ledge wide enough to rest on, she did not seek the shelter of an overhang. Instead, she chose a spot fully exposed to the elements, where the unfiltered light of the sinking sun painted the rock in strokes of fiery orange and deep violet. The wind here was a constant, battering force, chilling her to the bone, but it also carried the clearest, purest notes of the plateau's song. Her comfort was irrelevant. Capturing the true, untamed spirit of this place required her to meet it on its own terms, to share in its harshness, to understand its beauty. Her endurance was no longer separate from her art. It was the very brush she would use to paint this sky. Finally, hauling herself onto a broad, flat shelf of rock, she turned to look back the way she had come. And in that moment, the world below her simply fell away. The clouds parted like a curtain, revealing the entire, singing landscape laid out beneath her. It was a living map of wind and stone, and she was poised at its very heart. The pearlescent white bled across the primed canvas in a wide, sweeping arc, a gesture as broad and open as the sky itself. Elara worked with a newfound physicality, her entire body engaged in the motion, mimicking the immense, flowing forms of the clouds that sailed past her rocky perch. She mixed subtle grays not as shades of shadow, but as depths of atmosphere, layering them to suggest the colossal weight and volume of the vapor. And as the last brushstroke settled on a particularly billowing cumulus formation, something impossible happened. The painted cloud on the canvas seemed to drift, its edges softening as if caught in a slow, silent current of their own. The painting was not just depicting the sky, it was beginning to breathe with it. But the real wind would not be ignored. A sudden, violent gust slammed into the easel, threatening to rip the whole assembly from the ledge and send it spinning into the void. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Dropping her brush, she scrambled to anchor the wooden legs with heavy rocks, her muscles straining against the gale. Each new blast tugged at the canvas like an invisible hand, trying to tear the nascent sky in two. The conflict was immediate and direct, a battle between her creative will and the raw, untamable power of the elements. She could not fight the wind, so she had to invite it in. Picking up her brush again, she loaded it with a thinner, more fluid wash of gray. Instead of fighting the gusts, she timed her strokes with them, allowing the wind to pull the pigment into long, feathery streaks across the wet surface. The result was not a mistake, but a masterpiece of chance. The paint created textures no human hand could ever replicate, capturing the wild, chaotic energy of the high air. This was the next vital lesson, a collaboration far more demanding than her silent partnership with the forest. Here, the environment was not a quiet participant, but an assertive co-creator, and her success depended on surrendering a measure of control, on trusting that the storm's interference would improve the art. It was a terrifying and exhilarating dance, one that would define every painting to come. As the final cloud form settled into place, its shape harmonizing with the wind-swept textures, the light on her ledge suddenly dimmed. A vast, cold shadow fell over her and the painting, cast by something immense and silent gliding between her and the sun. The shadow was not a cloud. It was a living silence that blotted out the sun. Elara looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Landing on the ledge with a grace that defied its immense size was a creature of wind and stone. Its feathers were not soft plumes, but layered plates of polished granite, catching the last rays of sun with a metallic gleam. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but captured storm light, swirling with silent lightning. This was a sky singer, an ancient soul of the high plateaus, and it now stood mere feet from her, observing the half-finished sky on her canvas. The relentless wind song that had been the plateau's constant voice fell into an abrupt, unnerving hush, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. The silence felt heavier and more judgmental than the entire assembled council of Dreamweavers. This being's gaze was a physical pressure, intelligent and piercing, seeming to look not at her painting, but through it, into the very core of her intent. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a stark counterpoint to the sudden quiet. Every instinct screamed to freeze, to wait for a sign of approval or dismissal. But to stop painting now would be a confession of fear, an admission that she was an intruder. Instead, she made a deliberate choice. She dipped her brush into a wash of silver, her hand steadying as she returned to the canvas. But as her brush met the surface, she did something else. Softly, almost under her breath, she began to hum. It was the melody of the wind song, the complex refrain she had spent hours transcribing in her sketchbook. It was not a perfect imitation, but a respectful echo, a way of saying, I am not just seeing, I am listening. The stakes in this quiet exchange were absolute. The approval of this being was not about personal success. It was the key to unlocking the true essence of this place. Its rejection would not merely mean a failed painting. It would mean the plateaus themselves would reject her, their magic remaining forever locked away, another world lost to the creeping dullness. The creature's head tilted, its storm-lit eyes narrowing slightly, analyzing both the visual and the auditory offering. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound was the soft scratch of her brush and her own fragile hum. Then, the sky singer shifted. It stretched one vast, stone-feathered wing, the movement slow and deliberate. The very air seemed to part around it. The tip of a primary feather, sharp and gleaming, extended toward her canvas. It did not touch the paint, but the very edge of the wooden frame, leaving behind a faint, shimmering mark like a fossilized breath on glass. The impossible azure bloomed where the feather had grazed the canvas, a color so deep and vibrant it seemed to hold the entire sky within a single drop of pigment. It was a gift of pure essence, a shade that did not exist on any earthly palette, and its appearance completed the painting in a way Elara had not known was needed. It gave the vast, wind-swept sky a focal point, a soul, anchoring the chaotic motion of her cloud forms with a profound and silent depth. A surge of awe and gratitude washed over her so powerfully that her hand froze above the canvas, trembling. To simply splash this divine color everywhere would be a desecration, a shout of arrogance in a place that spoke in whispers and wind. The gift demanded reverence, not domination. Her decision was instantaneous. She dipped the tip of her finest brush into the radiant azure, loading it with just a hint of the magic. Then, with the lightest touch, she began to place tiny, precise highlights deep within the folds and curves of her painted clouds. It was not a dominant color, but a secret truth hidden in plain sight, a glimpse of the eternal sky concealed within the temporary forms of the vapor. This subtlety honored the spirit of the plateau, a realm where the most powerful forces were often the most gentle and unseen. In that moment, the painting transformed from a representation into a true dialogue, a successful model for the sacred partnership she would need to forge with every fading realm. As if acknowledging this perfect understanding, the sky singer let out a cry that was not a sound, but a silent pulse of light that vibrated through the very rock beneath her feet. Then, with a powerful thrust of its stone-feathered wings, it launched from the ledge, becoming a solitary, soaring note in the vast, singing blue. The final stroke of Azure was a whisper against the canvas, a completion so perfect it felt like a key turning in a long locked door. And then the painting dissolved. It did not fade or tear. It simply unraveled into a river of pure, silent light that rose from the easel, a luminous serpent coiling upward into the twilight air. Elara could only watch, her breath held, as this river of her own creation met the vast, darkening sky above. For one impossible, breathtaking moment, the two skies became one. The clouds, those great nomads of the upper air, slowed their eternal journey. They shifted, they flowed, they rearranged themselves with a gentle, deliberate grace, until the heavens mirrored the exact composition on her now vanished canvas. The wind song returned, but it was changed. The once wild, chaotic melody was now woven through with the deep, resonant rhythm of the whispering woods, a bass note of ancient peace that gave the soaring area of the plateau a newfound stability and heart. She had not copied the sky, she had conversed with it, and in doing so, she had given it a new dream to dream, a hairline fracture in the plateau's ancient magic, a dissonance she had felt but never seen, was sealed with a silent, brilliant flash of harmony. The light from the fused skies slowly faded, the clouds resumed their natural shapes, and the wind's song softened to its familiar hum, but the change was permanent. The air itself felt cleaner, sharper, yet more peaceful, as if the world had taken a deep, calming breath. On the ledge where her canvas had been, only the empty easel remained, and beside it, the single, glowing feather mark left by the sky singer. Elara sank to her knees, not in exhaustion, but in awe. The weight of what had just happened settled upon her, not as a burden, but as a profound understanding. This was the true power she now carried. Her art was a loom, and she was weaving the fraying edges of the world back together, one silent, healing dream at a time. you.